Prince Harry has just dropped a bombshell that no one saw coming. A revelation so shocking, so devastating, that it has already led to the arrest of Meghan Markle. The very woman who once seemed untouchable, who walked through the world with the aura of celebrity royalty, now finds herself facing accusations that could alter the course of her life forever. But how did it come to this? How did the private dealings of a duchess, shielded from public scrutiny, erupt into a scandal that would shake not just the royal family, but the entire world? And most importantly, what role did Prince Harry play in unmasking these secrets? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine a quiet evening in the Sussex household. The world sees a picture-perfect life, red carpets, charity galas, smiling for the cameras, waving at adoring fans. But behind closed doors, the tension was building, a storm silently gathering, unnoticed by the public eye. Prince Harry, a man burdened by loyalty, family history, and public expectation, had begun to uncover discrepancies that could not be ignored. Funds intended for children's hospitals, for sick children whose lives hung in the balance, were allegedly being diverted. And not just a little, not a minor oversight. Millions of pounds, meticulously routed into private accounts. Money meant to heal, to protect, to give hope, had allegedly vanished into secrecy. When Harry stumbled upon these documents, he faced a choice: ignore them and stay loyal, or expose the truth and risk everything he held dear. This is not a tale of royal gossip or petty intrigue. This is a story of betrayal, financial deception, and moral reckoning. How could a figure so carefully curated in the public eye, so celebrated for philanthropy, be implicated in something so dark? How did a man who swore to protect his family decide that the world needed to know what had been happening behind closed doors? The answers lie in the documents, the secret bank transfers, the emails, and most critically, in Harry's conscience. The first leak came quietly, almost imperceptibly, to journalists and insiders who knew enough to connect the dots, but not enough to see the full picture. A small transfer here, an unusual transaction there, notes on charity ledgers that didn't quite add up. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable to the average observer, but to someone who understood the stakes, it was enough to raise alarm bells. Harry, who had always been protective of his wife in the public sphere, was now confronted with evidence that demanded action. It wasn't just about exposure. It was about accountability, about the moral imperative to ensure that children's donations were used as promised. Consider the psychological weight on Harry at that moment. The son of Diana, Princess of Wales, who had endured relentless public scrutiny and betrayal in his own family, now faced a moral dilemma. He had to decide whether loyalty to his spouse outweighed responsibility to the greater good. Every father, every advocate for children, would feel the same crushing pressure. And so, the decision was made. The evidence would be shared. The world needed to know. But no one could have predicted the immediate fallout. Within hours, the story exploded. Media outlets scrambled, headlines screamed, social media erupted in disbelief. How could Meghan Markle, celebrated for her charitable endeavors, be implicated in diverting funds meant for children's hospitals into private accounts? The reaction was instantaneous, polarized, and intense. Supporters were in shock, refusing to believe the allegations. Critics seized the moment, highlighting every previous controversy as evidence of a pattern. And in the midst of it all, Meghan found herself facing law enforcement inquiries, statements being taken, and an arrest that seemed both surreal and inevitable. Yet, the public narrative is only part of the story. Behind the flashing cameras and breaking news lies the intimate, often unseen, struggle of Prince Harry. The meticulous research, the sleepless nights spent cross-referencing documents, the ethical debates that must have echoed endlessly in his mind. Every email, every transfer, every ledger entry was a potential thread that could unravel not just Meghan's reputation, but the complex fabric of their shared life. And it was Harry who bore the brunt of the moral responsibility. This scandal is not merely financial. It is emblematic of trust broken, promises betrayed, and power misused. Charities, particularly those aimed at children, rely on the integrity and honesty of their patrons. When money intended for life-saving medical treatments is allegedly redirected, it is not just a legal violation. It is a moral crisis. The implications reach far beyond royal households or celebrity influence. They touch the fundamental ways in which society relies on philanthropy to safeguard the vulnerable. Harry's revelations also raise profound questions about public perception and image management. For years, Meghan Markle cultivated a narrative of philanthropy, compassion, and advocacy. The public adored her for it. But what happens when the curtain is pulled back and the narrative clashes violently with the evidence? The resulting cognitive dissonance is jarring. How does a public reconcile admiration with betrayal? How do the media, charities, and supporters navigate this sudden upheaval of trust? These questions form the backdrop against which Harry's leak becomes not just an act of revelation, but a pivotal moment in reshaping the dialogue around accountability, power, and celebrity. Now, consider the tension within the palace walls. The monarchy, historically adept at managing scandals and public perception, now faced a new, unprecedented challenge. A family member, a prince, had leaked sensitive information implicating his spouse in financial misconduct. It was a scenario that no one had anticipated, one that threatened to destabilize the careful balance of privacy, protocol, and public image. Advisors scrambled, communications departments drafted statements, and the legal team prepared for inquiries that would inevitably follow. Every move was scrutinized, every word analyzed, and every public reaction carefully measured. And yet, even amidst the chaos, Harry remained focused on the moral imperative. He understood that exposing wrongdoing, no matter the personal cost, was necessary. The story was not just about Meghan Markle. It was about safeguarding the truth, protecting vulnerable populations, and ensuring that accountability prevailed over secrecy. It was about shining a light into dark corners where deception thrived. And it was about making a choice that few would ever be forced to make, to risk familial bonds for the sake of integrity. But this story is far from over. While the public has seen headlines, tweets, and breaking news alerts, the deeper layers of deception, the intricate financial maneuvers, and the unseen battles are only now beginning to emerge. There are emails that have not been reported, conversations captured on secure lines that reveal motives, and documents that detail transactions so meticulously disguised that only someone with intimate knowledge could detect them. Each piece of evidence adds weight to the narrative, and each revelation deepens the suspense. By now, the questions on the audience's mind are urgent. What exactly did Harry uncover? How did he gain access to these secret accounts? What does this mean for Meghan's legal future? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean for the royal family, the charities, and the millions of supporters who believed in Meghan's benevolence? These questions will drive us through the entire story, as each chapter peels back another layer of secrecy, another act of deception, and another shocking revelation. As the story unfolds, you will see the intricate web of financial maneuvering, the ethical dilemmas faced by Prince Harry, and the ultimate consequences that led to Meghan Markle's arrest. Every document, every email, and every leak is a piece of a puzzle that no one expected to be solved in public. The stakes are higher than ever, the drama more intense, and the consequences more far-reaching. It is a tale of trust, betrayal, and moral reckoning that few could have anticipated, and even fewer are prepared to fully comprehend. And just when you think you understand the magnitude of the situation, the story takes yet another twist. For behind the public-facing drama lies a series of private revelations, conversations, and hidden truths that only Prince Harry could have brought to light. Secrets that not only implicate Meghan but also shine a light on the vulnerabilities within the structures meant to protect charitable funds, royal integrity, and public trust. The depth of the scandal is far greater than anyone could have imagined, and the next chapter promises even more astonishing revelations that will leave the world reeling. But what Harry revealed next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Introduction complete. But what Harry revealed next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The documents he unearthed weren't just a minor slip or an accounting error. They were a roadmap, a trail of transactions that led from charitable donations meant for children's hospitals straight into private accounts under Meghan Markle's control. The first thing to understand is the sheer scale of it. We're not talking about a few £1,000s quietly misallocated. This was tens of millions. Millions meant for children whose families relied on those funds to cover life-saving surgeries, therapies, and medications. And somehow, they had vanished. Have you ever wondered how someone could manipulate charity funds on this scale? Most people think of philanthropy as transparent, checks and balances, audits, oversight. But Harry discovered a pattern of cunning sophistication. It started with small diversions. Slightly overcharged invoices, travel expenses disguised as charity events, funds labeled vaguely as administrative costs. At first glance, nothing appeared overtly illegal. But when traced over time, when compared to the original intent of the funds, a horrifying picture emerged. Millions that were promised to hospitals were being rerouted. And the complexity wasn't just in the money itself, it was in how it was hidden. Harry's first clue came from a late-night review of bank statements connected to the Sussex Foundation. He noticed discrepancies. Transfers that should have gone to the St. George's Children's Wing or Portland Hospital never appeared. Instead, smaller, off-the-radar accounts were receiving regular deposits. Accounts registered under third-party companies, shell entities, and some even disguised as trusts with misleading names. Every layer created another obstacle, another chance to hide the truth. But Harry, relentless and meticulous, started piecing it together. He began by mapping each transaction. Visual charts, color-coded spreadsheets, a network of financial trails that no one else had the patience or the motivation to assemble. One payment would go from a donation fund to a company named in a different country, then to an offshore account, then back into the UK under a different name. Each step was deliberate, designed to obscure the origin and destination. Yet, someone had to authorize it. Someone had to oversee it. And as Harry dug deeper, the pattern pointed toward Meghan herself. The shock of this realization wasn't just professional, it was personal. Prince Harry had married this woman. He had shared the spotlight with her, built a public image together, supported her causes, and defended her against critics. Now, the documents suggested betrayal on a scale that went beyond public perception. Could it really be true? Could the woman he once called his partner be involved in something that endangered children's lives? That question haunted him as he pored over each ledger, each note, each encrypted email chain. Emails were particularly damning. One email, dated 6 months prior, outlined a plan to move a large sum, labeled as children's fundraising, into a private account that had no traceable connection to the hospitals it was meant to support. The language was careful, almost coded. Words like administrative flexibility and fund allocation optimization appeared repeatedly. On the surface, harmless. In reality, instructions to reroute millions. Harry's blood ran cold reading it. These weren't oversights. They were deliberate, strategic, and premeditated moves to mask the diversion of funds. And then came the shock: correspondence between Meghan and certain financial advisors, where the advisors expressed concern about the legality of the transfers. Meghan responded, in writing, that it was completely within her discretion and that accountability will be handled quietly. In other words, there was awareness of risk and a conscious decision to continue regardless. This wasn't just about redirecting funds. It was about secrecy, about hiding the truth from auditors, from trustees, from the very public who trusted her with these donations. Harry's reaction was a mix of disbelief, anger, and dread. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the children, the families, the promises made and broken. He couldn't allow it to continue. But he also understood the gravity of his next step. Exposing this information wouldn't just implicate Meghan. It would trigger a media storm, legal inquiries, and potential public outrage. The choice to leak the information was not taken lightly. He began to strategize. First, verifying the authenticity of every document. He cross-checked bank statements with public filings, reconciled donation records, and reviewed internal communications. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight. Any discrepancy could be used to discredit him or the claim. The process took weeks of meticulous work, often late into the night. Yet, he was determined. The stakes were too high to turn back. The pattern of diversion wasn't isolated. It extended across multiple charitable initiatives. Funds earmarked for neonatal care, pediatric oncology, and special education programs were all implicated. Each case followed a similar route: donation, transfer to an obscure account, eventual consolidation into private holdings. At every step, there was a paper trail, a trail that Harry carefully documented. But it wasn't just the money, it was the intent behind it. The emails, the meeting notes, the coded language, they all revealed a conscious effort to maintain appearances while diverting funds for personal gain. And then came the confrontation. Not public, not televised, but private, tense, and full of high emotion. Harry confronted Meghan with the evidence. The conversation, according to sources close to the palace, was intense. Words were exchanged, voices raised, accusations thrown. Meghan reportedly denied wrongdoing at first, then grew defensive, citing misinterpretations and miscommunications. Harry, however, was unwavering. He presented every document, every transfer, every coded email. There was no ambiguity. The evidence was overwhelming. The emotional weight of this confrontation cannot be overstated. A marriage, a partnership built on shared experiences and public image, was suddenly under siege. Trust was shattered. The very foundations of their relationship were questioned. For Harry, it was not just a legal or financial dilemma. It was deeply personal. He had to reconcile his loyalty to his family with his responsibility to the truth, to the children affected, and to the broader public who had placed faith in their charitable endeavors. This moment marked a turning point. Harry realized that passive inaction was no longer an option. The misappropriation of funds was too significant, the potential harm too great, to remain silent. Legal counsel was sought, documents were prepared for disclosure, and the strategy for leaking the information was carefully devised. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. It wasn't about public humiliation, it was about ensuring justice for those who had been betrayed. But as the pieces fell into place, Harry encountered an unexpected obstacle: the network of influence surrounding Meghan. Advisors, publicists, and legal teams all moved swiftly to contain the narrative. Messages were sent to media outlets, statements were drafted, and attempts were made to control the flow of information. Harry, aware of the potential for suppression, had to act quickly and decisively. The stakes were escalating. The window for exposing the truth without interference was narrow. And then came the leak. Carefully timed, strategically executed, and backed by irrefutable evidence. The world woke up to the shocking revelation. Meghan Markle, once the emblem of charitable generosity, was now implicated in diverting millions from children's hospitals into private accounts. Headlines screamed. Social media exploded. Families who had donated, expecting their contributions to aid children in need, demanded answers. The legal ramifications were immediate. Investigations were launched, and within days, law enforcement began taking statements. What had been a hidden scandal was now public, undeniable, and explosive. The reaction was polarizing. Supporters of Meghan defended her fiercely, citing media bias and questioning Harry's motives. Critics were relentless, drawing attention to previous controversies and framing the alleged diversion of funds as part of a larger pattern. The royal family, meanwhile, faced an unprecedented crisis. Protocols were strained, advisors worked overtime, and every public appearance was scrutinized for signs of scandal management. The palace, long accustomed to controlling narratives, now found itself reacting rather than directing. And yet, amid the public uproar, one question lingered. How far did this reach? The documents Harry had leaked painted a picture of sophisticated financial manipulation, but there were hints that even more might be uncovered. Other accounts, other transfers, other organizations could potentially be implicated. The scope of the scandal was potentially much larger than anyone realized, and the next revelation could further shake the foundations of public trust. As investigators combed through the evidence, it became clear that this was only the beginning. The full extent of the diversion, the intent behind it, and the network of complicity had yet to be revealed. And Harry, who had already risked everything by leaking the initial documents, knew that there were still deeper layers to uncover. The next chapter promised to reveal not just financial misconduct, but the motivations, the manipulations, and the shocking strategies employed to maintain secrecy. And just when it seemed the storm had reached its peak, a new piece of evidence surfaced, one that could change everything again. Harry had uncovered a set of offshore accounts that had never appeared in any official records, accounts so cleverly disguised that even seasoned financial investigators had missed them. These weren't just ordinary bank accounts. They were labyrinthine structures involving multiple layers of shell companies, trusts in tax havens, and complex financial instruments designed to make tracing nearly impossible. And at the center of it all was Meghan Markle. Imagine a web spun so intricately that each thread seems harmless until you step back and see the entire trap. That's what Harry faced. Each account was labeled with innocuous names: Project Horizon, Sunset Initiative, Global Ventures, nothing that would raise a red flag. But the money flowing through them was unmistakable. Large sums originally donated to children's hospitals and educational charities were being siphoned off, disguised as legitimate business transactions, charitable reinvestments, or even philanthropic loans. It was brilliance and deception entwined, a financial masquerade of the highest order. Harry realized that the scale of this was far beyond what he initially imagined. Millions of pounds, dollars, and euros moved through these accounts monthly, often returned in a way that appeared legal but effectively enriched private holdings. The question was chilling. How many children had been denied medical care because of this? How many families had been counting on funds that never arrived? Each dollar, each pound, each euro represented a life potentially impacted. And the fact that it was orchestrated behind a veneer of philanthropy made it even more disturbing. He began tracing the funds meticulously, following the trail through a series of international transfers. One sum would leave a UK charity account, travel to a corporate entity in the Cayman Islands, then move through a shell company in Luxembourg, and finally land in a private investment portfolio registered under a trust in the Bahamas. At every stage, the purpose was obscured, yet a single pattern emerged. All paths led to accounts that Meghan could control directly or indirectly. The sophistication of the scheme was astonishing and terrifying. The emails Harry uncovered alongside the financial records revealed even more. Advisors had expressed repeated concern about regulatory oversight and legal exposure. There were internal warnings, subtle but unmistakable: risk of audit, visibility from authorities increasing, potential reputational damage. And Meghan's responses were calculated, almost cold. No problem, we'll adjust allocations, ensure it remains opaque. Discretion is paramount. The human cost behind the numbers seemed secondary, almost irrelevant. For Harry, reading these emails was like stepping into a parallel universe, one where profit and secrecy mattered more than the lives affected by the diverted funds. The investigation revealed not just diversion, but active concealment. Bank statements were doctored. Charitable records had been reconciled to show compliance, while actual transactions were hidden in layers of accounting jargon. Harry found evidence of phantom expenses, money allegedly spent on hospital infrastructure or staff salaries, which had never actually been used for that purpose. Instead, these funds had been quietly transferred to private holdings. And while these discrepancies might appear subtle to an outsider, the cumulative effect was massive. The total sum of diverted funds likely reached tens of millions. Harry also discovered that this was not an isolated pattern. Similar accounts existed for multiple charitable initiatives. The structure was replicated across different foundations and projects, all operating under the public image of generosity. Each initiative had its own offshore mechanism, a private pipeline ensuring that donations intended for the vulnerable never reached their destination. It was as if a blueprint had been created, a repeatable model of diversion disguised under philanthropy. And yet, what was most shocking wasn't just the financial manipulation. It was the coordination. Documents showed meetings with financial advisors, lawyers, and accountants, all aware of the nature of these transfers and all complicit, or at least willing to facilitate them. Even more concerning were indications that Harry himself had been deliberately kept out of the loop for some of these accounts. Meghan had ensured that certain transfers occurred under the guise of operational discretion, limiting access to a select few trusted aides. This level of secrecy, executed within their own household and foundation, demonstrated a sophisticated strategy of concealment. The discovery of these accounts sent shockwaves through Harry. Not only did they confirm the diversion of charity funds, but they also revealed a level of premeditation and sophistication that made the situation far worse than he initially imagined. And as he began piecing together the full scope, he realized that exposure could not wait. The longer these accounts remained active, the more children, families, and hospitals would continue to suffer. The ethical, personal, and legal imperatives aligned. Action was necessary, and Harry had become the linchpin of this unfolding revelation. As he prepared to leak the information to authorities, Harry faced another ethical dilemma. Revealing the offshore accounts would not just implicate Meghan. It could also involve dozens of professionals across multiple countries, triggering international financial investigations. The fallout could be monumental, affecting lives far beyond the immediate circle. But Harry knew that the truth demanded exposure. Covering it up would make him complicit. Remaining silent would perpetuate harm. The stakes were higher than ever. Then came the most alarming realization. Some of the offshore structures were actively designed to resist legal scrutiny. Legal barriers, secrecy laws, and jurisdictional protections meant that even once exposed, funds could be shielded from immediate recovery. It was a sophisticated fortress of secrecy, built to protect those at the top, while leaving the most vulnerable completely unprotected. Harry had anticipated resistance, but the level of obstruction baked into the system was staggering. And just when he thought he had mapped every path, he found an anomaly, a series of transfers that didn't fit the pattern. Small, irregular payments, moving between seemingly unrelated accounts, often labeled vaguely as consulting fees or operational expenses. Yet, the trail suggested an entirely new dimension. Some of these payments were not simply diverted funds. They were hush money-style transfers, potentially designed to silence individuals who knew too much. Advisors, charity staff, and even family members could have been compensated or incentivized to keep quiet. The scandal was bigger, more intricate, and more dangerous than Harry had imagined. The implications were staggering. Not only was the charitable diversion a massive betrayal of public trust, but it now also suggested attempts to conceal and manipulate anyone who might expose the truth. The ethical and legal consequences were mounting exponentially. Harry knew that the next move had to be decisive, carefully planned, and irreversible. Once these offshore accounts and their mechanisms were revealed publicly, there would be no turning back. The moment of truth arrived when Harry coordinated with investigators and legal authorities. The evidence was presented, scrutinized, and verified. Banks were notified. Trusts were investigated. Legal procedures were set in motion. Meghan Markle, once shielded by status and public perception, found herself facing an unprecedented legal storm. Arrest warrants, inquiries, and public exposure loomed on the horizon. And for Harry, the decision to leak the information, once fraught with personal risk, now seemed like the only path forward to protect the vulnerable and restore accountability. Yet, even as the legal wheels began turning, Harry realized that this was just the beginning. For every offshore account uncovered, every transaction traced, there were still questions unanswered. Who else was involved? Were there other layers, even more secretive, that had yet to be discovered? And perhaps most importantly, how would Meghan respond once confronted with the full scale of exposure? And then, as if the storm weren't already raging, a new revelation emerged, one that threatened to redefine everything Harry thought he knew about the network surrounding Meghan Markle. But what was this revelation that Harry stumbled upon? A name, a location, a connection that nobody outside their inner circle could have predicted. As he dug deeper, he discovered an intricate web of people, accounts, and institutions, a hidden network meticulously crafted to protect Meghan while keeping the charitable diversions invisible to the public eye. And at the center of it all was someone Harry had trusted, someone whose loyalty he had never questioned, until now. The network wasn't just financial. It was personal, professional, and political. Advisors, old friends, consultants, lawyers, and even members of private foundations. Every single thread seemed to be connected, operating like an invisible safety net for Meghan. The most shocking part? Many of these individuals weren't just complicit. They were actively helping orchestrate the concealment. Each transfer of money, each offshore account, each manipulated report had a human guardian ensuring nothing went astray. Harry realized that exposing the offshore accounts alone wouldn't be enough. This network had layers, redundancies, and fail-safes. Even if authorities froze one account, Funds could instantly move through another pathway, disappearing from sight. It was a web designed to ensure Meghan's financial activities remained untouchable, a shadow infrastructure built to withstand scrutiny. What stunned Harry most was the level of sophistication. Some of the lawyers involved were international experts in tax law and offshore finance. Some advisors had experience in political strategy, ensuring that any public exposure would be countered with carefully managed narratives. There were communication protocols, encrypted messages, private channels, and even disinformation leaks, meant to confuse investigators or shift attention away from the real financial flows. Every step of the network seemed calculated with precision. And yet, amidst the complexity, there were cracks. Human error, oversight, and the occasional ego-driven misstep had left traces, breadcrumbs Harry could follow. One email, sent accidentally to the wrong recipient, revealed the identity of an intermediary responsible for moving funds through multiple jurisdictions. A misfiled document exposed the timeline of several diverted donations. A private conversation between two advisors hinted at internal disagreements over risk. Each discovery opened a door to more secrets, more evidence, and more questions. The implications of the network went beyond just money. Harry learned that Meghan had cultivated personal relationships strategically, ensuring she could rely on loyalists who would act as buffers against exposure. Trusted aides were given significant authority over charitable operations, creating layers of separation between Meghan and the actual movement of funds. This distance wasn't just convenience, it was protection. The further removed she was from day-to-day transactions, the harder it would be to legally tie her to any wrongdoing. But even with the network's sophistication, Harry uncovered a pattern. Every layer had a weak point. Every advisor, no matter how skilled, had left a trace. Every encrypted message had a digital footprint. Every offshore account had a paper trail if you knew where to look. And Harry knew exactly where to start. With the right coordination, the network that seemed invincible could begin to unravel, thread by thread. As he examined the relationships within the network, Harry also began to notice a troubling human dimension. Some individuals appeared to be motivated not just by loyalty or financial gain, but by fear. Fear of public scandal, fear of legal consequences, fear of losing access to influence or wealth. Others were motivated by ambition, positioning themselves to benefit if Meghan's scheme succeeded. The mix of fear, ambition, and secrecy made the network highly resilient, but also dangerously unstable. One wrong move could trigger a cascade of exposures. And that wrong move wasn't far off. Harry's investigation revealed a set of digital communications that pointed to a critical vulnerability. A scheduled transfer of charity funds disguised as operational expenses, set to move into a private account within days. The instructions had been sent in clear text to one intermediary, who, unaware of being monitored, would execute the transaction automatically. If intercepted at the right moment, Harry could halt the transfer and gather concrete evidence of direct diversion. The stakes were immense. This was no longer just about uncovering past wrongdoing. It was about preventing further harm, stopping more funds from vanishing, and gathering irrefutable proof that could be presented to authorities. Every hour mattered. Each moment of hesitation could allow more money to be siphoned away, potentially impacting countless children relying on hospital donations. But as Harry prepared to act, he uncovered an even more shocking layer of the network, an individual whose identity he could hardly believe. Someone he had considered an ally in previous royal dealings, someone who had been advising both Harry and Meghan, was secretly playing both sides. This person had been feeding Meghan information about Harry's investigation while simultaneously guiding him toward evidence that seemed incriminating yet incomplete. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, a double agent embedded within the network, ensuring that Harry could only uncover fragments while the true extent remained hidden. The realization hit hard. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. It wasn't just about financial deception anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, and manipulation at the highest personal level. The very people Harry had once counted on for support were entangled in Meghan's network, actively working against him. Every move he made could now be anticipated, every strategy countered. Yet amidst the chaos, Harry saw a glimmer of opportunity. The double agent had left digital fingerprints, subtle clues that revealed the timing, routes, and beneficiaries of the diverted funds. With careful analysis, Harry could use these to dismantle the network piece by piece. The double agent, in their overconfidence, had created the very vulnerability that could bring down the entire hidden structure. And as he dug deeper into the network, mapping connections, tracing transfers, and documenting communications, Harry realized one terrifying truth. Meghan had been preparing for this moment all along. The network wasn't just defensive, it was offensive. Contingency plans were in place to discredit anyone attempting exposure, to redirect investigations, and to maintain control over the narrative. This wasn't accidental. It was premeditated, calculated, and ruthless. The question now was, how far would she go to protect herself? And what lengths would those loyal to her within the network go to ensure her schemes remained hidden? Harry knew that uncovering the network was only the beginning. What came next would determine whether justice could prevail or if the entire system would collapse under deception, leaving Meghan untouchable, yet leaving countless victims behind. And then, as Harry connected the final dots in the network map, he uncovered the most shocking revelation of all, a link that suggested the diversion of charity funds might be only the tip of the iceberg, hinting at financial maneuvers far more audacious and illegal than anyone had imagined. But what could be more audacious than diverting millions from charitable causes meant to save children's lives? Harry soon discovered that the scale of Meghan's financial maneuvering was staggering. A hidden fortune, carefully layered and concealed, spanning continents, banks, and legal jurisdictions. This wasn't just a few misappropriated donations. It was an empire of wealth designed to operate entirely outside public scrutiny, completely insulated from accountability. The trail began subtly. Initially, Harry found references to property investments in private emails, cryptic mentions of the Haven, Seaview Estates, and Sunrise properties. These were not registered in her name, but traced through shell companies, offshore trusts, and discrete legal entities. A modest estate here, a luxury villa there. It didn't seem extraordinary at first glance. But when Harry followed the financial threads, a pattern emerged. Each property was tied to other assets, creating a web of value that extended into luxury yachts, high-end vehicles, rare art, and private equities. The numbers were mind-boggling. Tens of millions, possibly hundreds, were circulating quietly, untouched by public scrutiny or charitable oversight. What stunned Harry was how seamlessly this fortune was integrated into everyday operations. Transactions were disguised as ordinary expenses. Renovation costs for a charity guest house that was actually a private vacation home. Consulting fees paid to offshore entities that were secretly owned by Meghan herself, and event expenses that funded lavish personal gatherings. Every layer was calculated, deliberate, and nearly invisible unless you knew precisely where to look. The emails he discovered told another story. Advisors and accountants had warned repeatedly about the risks. Transparency issues may arise, one email read. Another noted, high likelihood of discovery if oversight increases. Meghan's responses were consistent. Ensure it remains untraceable. Layer the assets through multiple jurisdictions. Only trusted intermediaries may execute transactions. The tone was confident, commanding, and devoid of concern for legality or ethics. It was as if the moral dimension never existed. Only the mechanics of concealment mattered. Harry's shock deepened as he traced the connections to luxury acquisitions. A high-value painting, allegedly for a charity gala auction, was quietly stored in a private collection. A superyacht, purchased through an opaque trust, was repeatedly registered in offshore names, changing jurisdictions with every port. Private jets were acquired via shell corporations, their ownership hidden under layers of corporate secrecy. Even the bank accounts used to manage these assets were designed to obscure the ultimate beneficiary, Meghan herself. But there was more. The financial web extended to international investments. Hedge funds, venture capital, and private equity firms became conduits for wealth accumulation. Funds intended for public initiatives, or raised through charitable donations, were diverted into these investments. Returns flowed back into the same offshore structures, compounding the fortune in secrecy. It was a self-sustaining system, almost impossible to detect, let alone untangle. And then Harry noticed something that made his blood run cold. The diversion of funds wasn't only for personal luxury. There were payments to third parties designed to influence, intimidate, or ensure silence. Lawyers, accountants, advisors, even some staff members who had knowledge of irregularities received substantial consulting fees from accounts hidden within the fortune. These weren't optional payments. They were insurance policies, quiet agreements, financial incentives, all designed to keep the network operational and prevent leaks. Harry realized that exposing these funds wasn't just a matter of tracing transactions. It meant unraveling a system that had been engineered to withstand scrutiny at every level. Legal safeguards were in place. Offshore secrecy laws protected the assets, and the intermediaries were incentivized to maintain absolute discretion. One wrong step, and the entire fortune could vanish, leaving no trace for investigators. He also uncovered evidence that some of these assets were linked to broader networks, including investors and institutions that had no direct connection to the royal family or to charitable organizations. These relationships suggested an even more audacious plan. Meghan was leveraging the diversion of funds to build influence, ensuring access to powerful financial partners who could shield her operations in the future. It wasn't simply about money, it was about control. Harry's next discovery was even more alarming. Certain assets had been purchased using anonymous, multi-layered transactions that funneled money from multiple charity accounts simultaneously. This meant that the hidden fortune was not only large but actively growing, with donations from several initiatives contributing to the same accumulation of wealth. Each donation, each grant, each fund intended to support vulnerable children or educational programs, added another brick to a secret empire that existed purely for Meghan's benefit. At this point, Harry faced a dilemma. Revealing the hidden fortune could destroy Meghan's network, but it would also publicly expose the mechanics of the wealth, potentially implicating dozens of innocent or semi-complicit intermediaries. Yet inaction meant allowing the system to continue unchecked, enabling further diversion of funds, continued accumulation of secret wealth, and ongoing harm to the intended recipients. The ethical stakes were enormous. And then he found the final piece of the puzzle, a document labeled simply as Master Ledger. This wasn't just an accounting sheet. It was the blueprint of the hidden empire, detailing every property, account, investment, and transfer, mapping out the entire financial network with astonishing precision. It included timestamps, amounts, intermediary names, and the ultimate beneficiaries. In essence, it was a comprehensive guide to every secret transaction. Holding the master ledger in his hands, Harry understood the magnitude of what he possessed. This document could bring the hidden fortune into the light, expose the network, and trigger legal action at the highest levels. But it also made him a target. Anyone with knowledge of its existence could act to retrieve it, to silence him, or to protect their interests. The stakes were no longer just about accountability. They were about personal safety, power, and the potential for a public scandal that could shake institutions to their core. The weight of this discovery was almost unbearable. Every step Harry had taken so far had brought him closer to uncovering the full scale of Meghan's secret empire. Yet he knew that revealing the fortune would be explosive, catastrophic even, and would leave no room for retreat. The ethical imperative was clear: the public had a right to know. But the path forward was fraught with risk, uncertainty, and consequences he could scarcely imagine. And then, just as he began planning the next moves, Harry noticed an anomaly in the master ledger. A series of entries that didn't fit any recognizable pattern, marked only by a cryptic symbol. Following these entries would lead him to something entirely unexpected, something that could redefine the entire investigation, revealing not just the hidden fortune, but a shocking connection that nobody could have anticipated. What could this symbol mean? At first glance, it was almost laughably simple. A small, unassuming mark scribbled next to a series of entries in the master ledger. But Harry had learned to trust his instincts. Nothing in Meghan's operations was ever accidental. Every detail, every annotation, every seemingly minor note had a purpose. And this symbol, small, obscure, and almost hidden, screamed significance. He stared at it for hours, tracing the entries associated with it. Each one corresponded to transfers of money, but unlike the other entries, These funds weren't moving to offshore accounts or property acquisitions. They were flowing into unknown entities, obscure shell companies with no public records, anonymous corporate structures, and, most disturbingly, accounts in jurisdictions infamous for secrecy and lax oversight. These weren't charitable diversions. They weren't luxury acquisitions. They were something else entirely. Something hidden from even the most experienced eyes. Harry felt a chill. The implications were enormous. If these entries were being funneled into an entirely separate network, then the scale of Meghan's financial operations was far beyond anything he had imagined. The hidden fortune was enormous, yes, but this could be unprecedented. And the cryptic symbol wasn't just a marker. It was a map, a key to unlocking the deepest, darkest layer of the empire. He began cross-referencing names, dates, and transaction amounts. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The symbol appeared consistently alongside entries linked to individuals with connections to political figures, foreign investors, and private institutions. The network extended beyond the UK, beyond Europe, and into the United States and the Middle East. There was money moving in ways that suggested influence, leverage, and strategic positioning. This wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about consolidating power. Harry's mind raced. Who were the beneficiaries? Who was controlling the flow? And why had Meghan felt the need to create this separate layer of secrecy? The answers weren't immediately clear, but one thing became evident. This cryptic symbol was a masterstroke of concealment. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the network could understand its meaning. And it was hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone determined enough to decode it. He knew he needed help. This wasn't something he could unravel alone. He contacted experts, forensic accountants, cybersecurity specialists, and legal analysts. Each one was astounded at the level of sophistication. They spoke in hushed tones about layering, international financial law, shell companies, and digital obfuscation. They described the methods as textbook examples of money laundering on a scale that rivaled the largest cases in modern history. And yet, even with their expertise, the cryptic symbol remained a puzzle. It was as if Meghan had left a personal signature, a challenge designed to test anyone brave enough to dig. Days turned into nights as Harry and his team pored over the ledger, tracing every entry associated with the symbol. The deeper they dug, the more audacious the findings became. There were payments to institutions claiming to be charitable operations, but in reality, they were private ventures benefiting a select few. There were offshore accounts tied to foundations that didn't exist publicly, holding funds that had been donated in good faith by well-meaning benefactors. And there were transfers so large, so convoluted, that even seasoned financial professionals struggled to follow the flow. And then, a breakthrough. One of the shell companies, linked by the symbol, had recently made a transaction that left a digital footprint, a transfer to a private trust in the Cayman Islands. The trust, in turn, was connected to a high-value asset portfolio, including art, real estate, and luxury collectibles. And embedded within this portfolio was a single, peculiar asset, a rare manuscript, centuries old, whose provenance was meticulously documented. The manuscript had been valued at tens of millions and, astonishingly, had been acquired shortly after a large donation was redirected through Meghan's network. Harry couldn't believe it. The cryptic symbol wasn't just a marker for hidden funds. It was a trail, pointing to something tangible, something that could be seized, verified, and traced. And if it was this visible, what else might be out there, obscured by layers of obfuscation and secrecy? As he traced the lineage of the manuscript, Harry uncovered an even more shocking detail. The acquisition coincided with a series of private meetings Meghan had held with advisors and intermediaries, away from public scrutiny. These meetings were meticulously logged in private calendars, encrypted emails, and communication apps designed to self-destruct. The convergence of timing, asset acquisition, and cryptic annotation suggested deliberate orchestration. Not just mismanagement or diversion, but calculated, high-stakes maneuvering designed to protect and expand the fortune. But the revelation didn't stop there. Following the trail further, Harry discovered that the funds linked to the symbol had been moved not just into assets, but into vehicles designed for political influence. Large donations were made to think tanks, lobbying organizations, and private initiatives in multiple countries. These weren't small contributions. They were substantial, often matching or exceeding annual budgets of the recipient organizations. And the intent? Influence, access, leverage. Meghan had created a network capable of wielding financial power across continents, shaping decisions, and manipulating outcomes without ever being directly visible. Harry realized the enormity of what he had stumbled upon. The cryptic symbol wasn't just a key to hidden money. It was a roadmap to a hidden empire, a secret network of wealth, influence, and power built behind the public face of royal charity work. And the deeper he dug, the more he understood that exposing it wouldn't just implicate Meghan in financial wrongdoing. It could trigger a global scandal, shake governments, and threaten institutions that had long believed themselves untouchable. And then, in the middle of cross-referencing one particularly complex series of transactions, Harry saw a name he never expected. Someone close to the royal circle, a trusted confidant who had advised both him and Meghan, appeared to be a direct beneficiary of the network. The implications were staggering. This person, long seen as an ally, had quietly profited from the hidden empire, receiving payments and assets while everyone else remained in the dark. It was a betrayal layered atop betrayal, a revelation that could change everything, not just legally, but personally. Harry sat back, heart pounding. The cryptic symbol had unveiled a path to the heart of Meghan's secret operations. But following it further would expose not only the truth, but also himself. Every step forward carried risk, legal, personal, and political. The deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous it became. And yet, he knew he couldn't stop. The stakes were too high, the implications too severe, and the truth demanded exposure. As he prepared for the next phase, Harry made one final observation. The entries marked by the symbol weren't just isolated anomalies. They were part of a pattern, one that suggested an even larger scheme in motion. A scheme so audacious, so intricate, that if it were revealed, it could explain not only the hidden fortune, but the motivation behind every secretive move Meghan had ever made. And then he found it. A single transaction, time-stamped, executed from an unexpected location, connecting all the previous dots. It was a revelation so shocking, so intricate, that it threatened to unravel everything, from charitable organizations to personal relationships, from public perception to hidden agendas. The question now was simple. Was Harry ready for what he was about to uncover next? What could a single transaction reveal that decades of careful observation hadn't? Harry stared at the record, the numbers glowing on his screen, almost surreal in their clarity. The transaction originated from a small, obscure account, registered under a name that meant nothing to the casual observer. But for Harry, trained now in the language of secrecy and deception, it was a doorway, a link connecting the entire labyrinth of hidden finances, offshore trusts, and shell companies into a single, undeniable chain. It was executed from an unexpected location, a boutique financial hub known for discretion, but unusual for someone in Meghan's orbit. No one would have thought to look there. It wasn't London. It wasn't New York. It wasn't even Geneva, the usual suspects for hidden wealth. This was a jurisdiction almost invisible on the global radar, where banking regulations were minimal and oversight practically non-existent. Every clue pointed to intentional concealment. Every choice screamed sophistication. Every layer reinforced the audacity of the design. Harry felt the weight of realization settle on him. This wasn't just a single diversion or a series of minor misappropriations. This was a masterstroke of financial engineering, executed with precision and foresight. And the unexpected location? It wasn't random. It was deliberate, chosen specifically to avoid scrutiny, to mislead investigators, to shield the ultimate beneficiaries. Whoever orchestrated this understood international finance in a way most people could never imagine. He cross-referenced the transaction with other anomalies in the master ledger. Each connection revealed something more disturbing than the last. Intermediaries were not just random professionals. They were carefully vetted, trusted allies with loyalty secured through financial incentive and legal obligation. The flow of money wasn't chaotic. It was structured, systematic, predictable in its sophistication. And at the center of it all, unmistakably, was Meghan. But Harry's shock deepened when he traced the flow of funds beyond assets and intermediaries. The transaction linked to a chain of payments to individuals with influence, media consultants, political operatives, and advisors who were publicly neutral but privately aligned with the network. Money that was meant for hospitals, schools, and charities was quietly redirected, layered, and used to cultivate relationships, gain favor, and manipulate narratives. Every move was calculated. Every dollar had a hidden purpose. Then came the most startling revelation. The unexpected location wasn't just a financial hub. It was a hub for intelligence networks, legal shadow operations, and highly secretive advisory firms. These weren't standard financial services. They were specialized operations capable of protecting assets, masking ownership, and providing plausible deniability in legal proceedings. The money wasn't just hidden. It was armored, fortified, insulated against any potential discovery or challenge. Harry's pulse quickened. What was the purpose of this network? Why create such an elaborate, almost impenetrable web? The answers were buried in the ledger, in the timing, and in the intersecting paths of transactions. He discovered that some transfers coincided with key events, public appearances, charitable campaigns, and media coverage that framed Meghan in a favorable light. Others coincided with moments of scrutiny or inquiries she seemed determined to evade. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about control, influence, power, reputation management at a global scale. And then he found the link he never expected. Buried within the sequence of transfers was a direct connection to a high-level financial consultant previously unknown to Harry. This consultant had acted as a broker, not just for funds but for legal shields, asset transfers, and communication suppression. Emails, encrypted messages, and coded notes revealed that this individual had been instrumental in orchestrating the transactions, ensuring no trace could be linked back to Meghan. The scale of collaboration, secrecy, and coordination was unprecedented. Harry leaned back, heart pounding. He realized he wasn't merely uncovering misappropriated funds. He was witnessing the architecture of a hidden empire. Every transaction, every shell company, every offshore trust, every advisor was part of a single, interconnected system designed to consolidate power and protect wealth beyond reach. The implications were staggering. Exposing this could trigger investigations across multiple countries, involve dozens of financial institutions, and potentially implicate high-profile allies who had knowingly participated. The deeper Harry went, the more he uncovered the personal stakes. Some of the individuals benefiting from these transactions were not strangers. They were family, trusted confidants, friends in positions of influence. The betrayal was deep, layered with deception, manipulation, and secrecy. And yet, the system was elegant. Every connection was intentional. Every financial maneuver, a carefully executed chess move. And then came the final, most explosive discovery. The cryptic symbol, the unexpected location, the single transaction, they all converged on a single conclusion. Meghan had established not only a secret fortune, but an operational network capable of manipulating narratives, controlling influence, and protecting assets at a level that most corporations could only dream of. This wasn't simply criminal or unethical behavior. It was strategic genius deployed for personal gain, with complete disregard for transparency, legality, or accountability. Harry understood then why so many attempts to challenge her actions had failed. The network was built to withstand investigation, designed to obscure, deflect, and protect. And yet, with the master ledger, the trail was finally visible. He now had the blueprint, the evidence, the connections, and he realized that revealing it wouldn't just expose Meghan's actions. It would unravel a carefully constructed world of hidden influence and secret wealth that extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. But before he could fully process the scope, another email pinged into his secure account. A warning, simple and direct: stop now. You don't know what you're dealing with. Back off or face consequences. Harry's stomach dropped. The stakes had escalated. What he had uncovered wasn't just scandalous, it was dangerous. And yet, there was no turning back. The network was laid bare before him. The question now was not what he had discovered, but what would happen next. And the next revelation, the one that would finally make clear the full scale of the operation, was closer than he realized. who really benefited from Meghan's secret financial empire. Harry had traced the transactions, mapped the shell companies, and decoded the cryptic symbols. But following the money was only half the story. To understand the full scope, he had to understand who was receiving it and why. At first, the list seemed almost random. There were charities with unfamiliar names, private trusts that didn't appear in public registries, and individuals with vague professional titles. But as Harry dug deeper, the pattern emerged. These weren't just random entities or anonymous recipients. Each had connections, direct or indirect, to Meghan's personal network. Some were friends, some distant acquaintances, some powerful figures in media, politics, and business. And all were in positions where the funds could be leveraged for influence or further advantage. One name stood out immediately: a former royal advisor, once considered one of the closest confidants to both Harry and Meghan. The advisor's private account had received multiple transfers, each one significant enough to raise eyebrows if scrutinized. When confronted with the evidence, the advisor claimed ignorance, a convenient, "I didn't know where the money came from" defense. But the digital footprint told a different story. Encrypted communications, scheduled meetings, and detailed financial logs all pointed to active participation. Harry realized the betrayal cut deeper than he had imagined. People he had trusted, relied on, even considered family allies, had been complicit in these secret dealings. Each transaction revealed layers of deception, not just in financial terms, but in personal trust. How had he overlooked these signs? The answer was simple. Meghan had built her network meticulously, with absolute control over every interaction, every decision, and every transfer. She had anticipated scrutiny and had designed contingencies to protect herself and her beneficiaries. Next on the list were several international figures, investors, consultants, and intermediaries operating in jurisdictions known for secrecy. They weren't just passive recipients. They actively facilitated the movement of funds. Some provided shell companies, others provided legal cover, and still others acted as intermediaries to obfuscate the flow. In total, Harry identified over 30 individuals who had knowingly participated in or benefited from the network. The breadth of involvement was staggering, stretching across continents and industries, and the potential fallout from exposure was enormous. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. While cross-referencing transaction dates with public events, Harry noticed an unusual coincidence. Many of the transfers occurred immediately after public announcements or charitable campaigns. Funds that were ostensibly donated to children's hospitals, education programs, and philanthropic initiatives were rerouted almost immediately into private accounts and trusts. It was as if the charitable facade was simply a smokescreen, a carefully constructed illusion to maintain public goodwill while diverting vast sums of money into private control. Harry's anger surged. How could someone manipulate charitable giving so blatantly? How could Meghan mask such large-scale diversions without detection for so long? And what did this mean for the institutions, the hospitals, the programs that relied on these funds? Entire children's wards, educational initiatives, and healthcare programs may have suffered as a result of these actions. The next revelation hit even closer to home. One of the beneficiaries was an individual within the royal circle itself, a person Harry had considered a mentor. Transactions totaling millions had flowed into accounts tied to this individual, creating a direct conflict of interest and a web of secrecy that could compromise the integrity of the royal institution. The implications were catastrophic. Not only had Meghan diverted funds, but she had also entwined family and royal confidants into her financial web. Exposure would be more than a scandal. It would shake the foundations of the monarchy. And then came the unexpected twist. Amid the financial trail, Harry discovered a series of payments labeled in the ledger as humanitarian aid, directed to regions experiencing crisis and disaster. On the surface, these appeared to be legitimate charitable acts. But upon further investigation, the funds had not reached the intended recipients. Instead, they had been intercepted and redirected through intermediaries, often landing in accounts controlled by private entities tied to Meghan's network. Children's hospitals were left underfunded, relief programs under-resourced, and yet the public narrative praised Meghan's generosity and philanthropy. Harry's frustration and disbelief grew with each discovery. This wasn't mere mismanagement or careless bookkeeping. This was calculated, systemic exploitation, with real-world consequences for the most vulnerable. And the deeper he dug, the more personal it felt. This was his family, his public life, and the trust of the people being violated. But just when he thought he had mapped the extent of the beneficiaries, a final revelation emerged that would change everything. Hidden among the seemingly innocuous accounts was a trust fund directly tied to a private educational institution, one he had never associated with Meghan. Large sums of money flowed into the institution, but rather than being used for scholarships or educational programs, they were funneled into assets benefiting a select few students. Individuals with close personal ties to Meghan and her inner circle. It was a perfect example of the network's reach and the calculated nature of the operation, appearing to serve the public good while enriching a private elite. Harry leaned back, trying to process the enormity of what he had uncovered. The hidden beneficiaries were not just recipients. They were co-conspirators, passive or active participants in a system designed to conceal, manipulate, and exploit. The implications were profound, both legally and morally. Exposing them would not only implicate Meghan, but would reveal a network of power, influence, and complicity that spanned continents. And then he saw it, an anomaly in the data, a single outlier transaction that didn't fit the established patterns. It was small, almost insignificant in monetary terms, but its timing, location, and recipients suggested something far more sinister. Harry's stomach tightened as he realized this could be the key to uncovering the final layer of the network, the piece that tied every beneficiary, every transaction, and every secret together. The question now was clear. Was he ready to follow this last thread, knowing it could unravel everything, including alliances, reputations, and perhaps even his own safety? Chapter 7 complete. Ready to continue to Chapter 8, picking up from the last cliffhanger. Harry's stomach tightened as he realized this could be the key to uncovering the final layer of the network, the piece that tied every beneficiary, every transaction, and every secret together. The question now was clear. Was he ready to follow this last thread, knowing it could unravel everything, including alliances, reputations, and perhaps even his own safety? Could a single small transaction really hold the power to expose everything? Harry stared at the ledger again, the numbers glaring under the cold light of his office. At first glance, it looked trivial. A few £1,000s transferred from one minor account to another. But Harry had learned to read between the lines. Patterns were everything, and this one didn't fit. The transaction was tiny compared to the millions he'd traced so far, almost laughably insignificant in isolation. Yet, its timing and routing were suspicious. It occurred just hours after a high-profile fundraising gala that Meghan had attended. Publicly, the event was a resounding success, raising tens of thousands for children's hospitals. Behind the scenes, however, this small transaction hinted at the mechanisms she had been using to siphon funds discreetly. Harry dug deeper. The money moved through multiple layers of accounts, each designed to mask its origin and final destination. Intermediaries were employed, some seemingly innocent, others notorious in the world of offshore finance. He traced it through 3 different countries, each with its own banking secrecy laws, before it disappeared into an obscure private trust. The final beneficiary? A name Harry had never encountered before, a minor, on paper, but with connections to someone in Meghan's inner circle. Could it really be this simple? Could this tiny thread unravel the massive network he'd spent weeks mapping? It seemed impossible, and yet, Harry felt a chill. Every previous discovery had followed a similar path. What appeared insignificant at first often revealed the deepest truths. He cross-referenced this transaction with other records. A pattern emerged. Several small, seemingly inconsequential transfers lined up with major events, media appearances, and public statements. The amounts were always just enough to avoid notice, just enough to stay under scrutiny. This was strategy, precision engineering designed to operate under the radar. It was subtle, insidious, and terrifyingly effective. Harry realized something else. The timing wasn't random. Each transfer occurred when attention was diverted elsewhere, when Meghan was promoting a new initiative, attending a gala, or photographed at an event. While the public applauded her apparent generosity, the network quietly redistributed funds in ways that